Yeah. So adrenal burnout is a myth. I'm not saying that burnout is a myth, by the way. Adrenal burnout is not a real thing. The adrenals don't burn out. Your adrenals are immensely powerful. They were designed to take you through famine and horrible experiences and challenges that could go on 3 lifetimes. There is something called adrenal insufficiency syndrome, which is a legitimate syndrome where the adrenals don't produce enough adrenaline or enough cortisol, because the adrenals have a multi-layers, and cortisol is released from one compartment and cells in one compartment and adrenaline from the other. You can create a system of, wired and tired in your brain and body that comes from excessive caffeine intake. I think it makes sense to not overindulge in caffeine. And over the years, I'll tell you a story very briefly. In graduate school, I became jaundiced. So I went to the doctor and I took some urine and blood analysis, and they started talking to me about alcoholism. Now, I don't drink. I used to have a drink or two now and again, but they were convinced I was an alcoholic because my liver enzymes were elevated. Then we got around to a discussion about caffeine. It turned out that I was drinking anywhere from 3 to 4 grams of caffeine a day. A typical cup of coffee is maybe 200, 500 milligrams. You can kill yourself drinking too much caffeine. And I wasn't on my way to death, but I was drinking far too much caffeine. But I prided myself on long work hours back then, and it was really bad, I think. And it was hard to taper that back. Now I drink usually a cup or 2 of coffee early in the day. Yerba mate is my preferred source of caffeine. Some days I don't drink any coffee. So you can really overdo it. I don't think you're going to burn out your adrenals. I think you're going to be stressed too often. You're just burning up energy. And we hear about fuel energy in the body, something you know far more about than I do, the utilization of fuel energy. But neurons and our nervous system have a sort of what I would call neural energy, the ability to focus, the ability to stay engaged. That's based on the dopamine and the noradrenaline system. And if you are chronically in a state of go, 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 and I should mention that the dopamine and adrenaline, when they are enriched in our body and they're released in our brain, we tend to focus on that exteroception, things outside the boundaries of our skin. It's all about what we don't have going on now or that we don't already possess that we need and want.
So they're motivating us.
They are motivating us, but that being in pursuit is fatiguing over time. Whereas there are other neuromodulators and neurotransmitters like serotonin, oxytocin, things related to the anandamide system that are more about feeling content with what we already have or what's in the confines of our skin. The beautiful place we happen to live in, the people that we happen to have, social connection, they tend to be very soothing. And, for better or for worse, a lot of our success in life professionally and our ability to obtain those relationships and those things come from being in pursuit. But you have to think of this as a seesaw that you need to be able to run back and forth on. You can't just be in full pursuit of things all the time. You have to learn how to turn that off. And so I guess the point is that with excessive intake of caffeine or stimulants of any kind, nicotine, caffeine, you're going to run into a problem where you'll feel lousy without it. You'll start to feel a little bit more depressed, and for people who have underlying issues with OCD or who have underlying anxiety, for people that tend to ruminate, for people that tend to have insomnia, it makes sense. You're just ingesting far too many stimulants. You have to find the sweet spot. And I always say that when you haven't slept well is when you should drink less caffeine. When you've slept really well, you can get away with drinking more caffeine because you're more regulated. The autonomic nervous system is also like a seesaw. You have this, what we call sympathetic or alertness system, and then you have a parasympathetic nervous system. And they're controlled by different neurons and molecules in the body. But don't think about the seesaw as you. What's happening is you have the seesaw inside of you, and you're kind of running back and forth. Okay, it's like, get to the appointment and have the meeting, do the podcast. Okay, we're really lasered in. And then do you have the ability afterwards to adjust that seesaw back? When you're sleep deprived, the hinge on that seesaw becomes very loose. So it's sort of like, boom, you're just locked in. I got to go, 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 go. And then you're exhausted. And so when you haven't slept well, you can probably get away with drinking a little bit of caffeine, but your whole system is dysregulated. When you've slept really well, you can probably drink more caffeine and feel more in control of your mind and body. The pineal is this little pea-sized gland, for the aficionados out there. It sits right near the 4th ventricle in the middle back of the brain. It's a really interesting gland. It releases melatonin, which is a hormone that has many functions. One of its functions is to control the transition into sleep. It doesn't keep us asleep, but it makes us sleepy. Melatonin is profoundly inhibited or reduced by light. So much so that, let's say you get up in the middle of the night and you go to the bathroom and you flip on the lights and they're very, very bright, like hotel, fluorescent lights, your melatonin just plummeted to zero. Okay. Melatonin, as far as we know, the only source of melatonin in the brain and body is the pineal. And it's a really important hormone. It also controls the timing of puberty in interesting ways. In children, melatonin is chronically high. And then when upon entry to puberty, it becomes more cyclic, cycled. Melatonin comes from the pineal, and the pineal has around it some bony structures in which that there can be some calcification of the pineal with age. However, there are a lot of theories out there that, fluoride calcifies the pineal. Maybe it does, I don't know. Caffeine can calcify the pineal. Maybe. This is all done post-mortem cadaver type studies, looking post-mortem. But the real question is, does the calcification mean anything for the function of the pineal? And I'm not aware of any solid evidence that says the calcification actually prevents the pineal from releasing sufficient amounts of melatonin. That said, I think most people are probably ingesting more caffeine than they should, including me. And, and the relationship between things like fluoride and all that, a few years ago, I would have thought, well, that's just kind of crazy, like wacko, whatever. But, we're discovering now more and more that all these things like sunscreens, I remember hearing years ago, there's stuff in sunscreen that will go into your brain. I remember someone telling me, like, you're crazy. What are you talking about? I'm a scientist. Turns out there are certain sunscreens that have molecules that can cross the blood-brain barrier. You can find them in neurons like 10 years after people have used this sunscreen topically. So I've become not paranoid about this. So I'm probably going to get this wrong. So maybe one of the viewers can put the right answer. But I think the one of the molecules is something called triclosan. And to those working in the triclosan industry, if it's not triclosan, I'm sorry. And if it is, please stop. No, I think there are a number of molecules that are in creams and perfumes and things that can go transdermal. Now, I don't put myself in the kind of really far category of, won't touch standard toothpaste and don't use standard soaps and whatever. But I also don't place myself into the category of, every chemical is fine for us. Keep an open mind. And I think, you could look at the work if you wanted to go down this path. There's a really wonderful professor of integrative biology at UC Berkeley, Tyrone Hayes, who's looked at things that are in common water sources that affect the hormone system. And he looked at this stuff in alligators and frogs and in humans, that there are molecules that can really disrupt the estrogen and testosterone systems. And that, when that stuff first came out, people thought, this is really conspiracy theory type stuff. No, this is solid science. It's in the textbooks. If you look at the endocrine textbooks, some of which are sitting on the shelf behind me, you'll find Tyrone's work, and it's very, very solid. And it's led to some, but not enough changes in water treatment and what kind of things people can dump into water. So, these are real effects, and you can learn a bit about it by exploring those things. But in any event, I think that the calcification of the pineal is something that I don't tend to worry about. I do think a lot about sleep and what's good for sleep and what's not good for sleep, but I don't worry about my pineal being calcified.